This is SQL Presentation 1B Calculations, and I am Dr. Renaud from Shawnee State University. In this presentation, we're going to show how to do some basic calculations within SQL statements, specifically selects, and a couple of the built-in functions. Our discussion will include literals, both numeric and string, basic arithmetic operators, rounding numbers and how to round numbers, concatenation of strings, and how to create a column alias or table aliases. The database tables we'll be using in this presentation are represented in this entity relationship diagram. This database and the data is available for download, and you will find the link in the description of this video. Let's start by looking at literals. A literal value is a value that you include in your computer program or your SQL statement. They don't come from the database, but they're values that you as a programmer or as an SQL designer will put into your statements. Literals come in two different types, numeric literals and string literals. Numeric literals also come in two different types. There are integer numeric literals that are whole numbers without a decimal point, and then there are decimal literals that have a decimal point. Decimal literals may be expressed as a whole number dot fractional part, but they can also be expressed in scientific notation, and you can see that in the example there and there, like 1.2 e to the negative fourth would be 1.2 times 10 to the negative fourth power, and 3.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Well, I think that's Avogadro's number from chemistry, but that's just one of those kinds of numbers we can play with. Or is that speed of light? I don't remember, but something. But you can see that would be a 302 with 22 more zeros after it. String literals are words or text or some other kind of literal value, and they're surrounded by quotation marks. They can be surrounded by either single quotes or double quotes. The reason there are both types of quotes is so that if you need to include a single quote inside a string, you can wrap it in double quotes. If you need a double quote inside a string, you can wrap it in single quotes. You can also put a double quote, so quote, text, quote, text, quote would put a single quote in the middle of the text. And you can use literal values throughout your SQL statement. Let's take a look at some. In this select, you see that the first column is actually the literal customer, and that's why it repeated the word customer all the way down as we selected the word customer ID, last name, and first name. So it kind of created a virtual column with the word customer. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know, but I thought it was a good example to just show the use of a string literal. Within SQL and our select statements, we can also do some basic arithmetic. The four operators of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division are represented by a plus, a minus, an asterisk for multiplication, and a slash for division. In the select statement you see at the bottom of the slide here, you can see I'm doing select 3 times the quantity 2 plus 7. SQL allows for parentheses to change the default order of operations. Notice there's no from table name. So this is the simplest of all selects. It just does a bit of math for you. Here's a use of a mathematical expression that kind of makes sense. Maybe we want to have a sale and all of our items' prices will be reduced by 10%. Everything's on sale, 10% off. Well, notice that we have item ID, description, price. And then the next column says price times 0.90. And you can see the result here of the price reduced by 10%. Now, because multiplying a decimal by 0.90, we don't have whole cents. So on the next slide, you'll see that I introduced the round function so that we can make this even prettier. The round function does just exactly what you would think it would do. It will round a value to, well, it'll round a value, a decimal value. If you pass round one number, it will round it to the closest whole number. If you pass round two numbers, the first number is the number to round, and the second number represents the number of decimal places to round the value to. So you can see that 8/3 is 2.66667, 2.666, and 6 is on to infinity. So to round 8/3 would be 3, because 2.67 would be 3. But to round 8/3 to only two decimal places, the 2.66 with 6 going on to infinity would round to 2.67. So if you want to round a decimal value into dollars and cents, using a round with the value comma 2 is how you would do that for most SQL statements. Here's the statement from a couple of slides ago, and you can see that now instead of just showing the price times 0.9, I'm doing a round to two decimal places of the price times 0.9, and you can see that now I have a nice, pretty, that way, right, a nice, pretty dollar and cent value in this column to be able to show to a client or show to a customer. The second function I want to introduce in this presentation is the concat function. The concat function does concatenation. Concatenation is kind of what addition to numbers is, but it's to strings. And it takes one string and puts the next string right up against it. It concatenates them together, because how can you add two strings? It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to add apples and oranges, but we can have apples, oranges jammed together into apple orange or apple oranges. So you can see here the select concat how, comma, space, comma, now would give us how now. Now, if I had left out this space and only concatenated how and now, the how now would have been ran together into one single word. You can see in this example, I use concatenation to concatenate the first name of a customer, a space, and the last name of a customer into a single column. It would make it a lot easier to generate mail or to address a letter or to address an email if those two attributes were put together. Just as a quick note, you can concatenate two or more values, string values together. Just be sure to put a comma between them. In my two examples, I concatenated 3 values, but you can concatenate 2 to however many different values you need to concatenate together into a single string. In the last example, you notice that the formula used to create a calculated column showed up on the SQL result, making the SQL result look rather messy. We can create something called a column alias by putting the word as and then a string containing a new name for a column after a column name if we want to change the column's name temporarily just for that select, or if we want to put an alias on the calculation so the calculation makes more sense. Table names may also be aliased with as, and we will introduce that in later videos probably. So here is the last big SQL statement we did, where I aliased the customer ID as ID, and I aliased the concatenation of the last name space and first name, or first name space and last name, to the word name, so that the SQL result looks much nicer for whoever's using your SQL result to see just ID and name, and they don't have to know the inner details of how that SQL statement generated that report. This concludes presentation 1B, calculations. This presentation is copyright 2019 by James M. Renault, PhD. You can contact me at jrenault@shawnee.edu. This work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Share-alike 4.0 International License, and I'd like to say thank you for watching.